The whole of the Bible is full of signs. It was common throughout the whole of the Old Testament period to be persuaded by signs or to call to God for them, seeing them as some sort of godly confirmation of what you were doing or wanted to do. And as we recalled last week, this continues all the way through the New Testament, where signs are used to demonstrate that this lowly, charismatic Nazarene was indeed the foretold Messiah. And the story that we read from Isaiah this morning is just another example of that type of sign usage. It refers to Isaiah, who wanted to prove to the unfaithful king of Judah, Ahaz, that God would punish his people if they veered away from godly ways. But even if they did, God would never give up on them. And as a sign to prove that, he says, "The Lord himself will give you a sign. A young woman is with child, and she will bear a son, and will call him Emmanuel." Now this, for centuries, has been totally misinterpreted, misread, and misunderstood. And as often is the case, has been totally taken out of context. It was, at the time, simply just a vehicle to try and put a bit of pressure on the king. But you will recognize the verse from the good old faithful authorized version of the Bible, which many of us were brought up on, and which was compiled itself about 400 years ago. The texts that it was using to bring together this authorized version, which sits in most churches still today, all the texts and manuscripts represent about 3 or 4% of the text and manuscripts that we have today with the newer versions. So it itself is completely wrong. But nevertheless, we will immediately know these words that we have heard year in and year out. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God is with us. We've had that Christmas after Christmas after Christmas to suggest to us that here is a prophetic utterance hundreds of years previous which foretold the coming of Christ. Of course it wasn't. But nevertheless, it's still something which we remind ourselves of. The whole thing is simply Isaiah putting the hard word on the king and trying to prove that his particular message is from God by pointing to some poor pregnant woman and claiming that it's some sort of sign. Yes, signs can be totally misread. That's one of the great problems with signs. I've been caught out a few times with, yes, parking signs. Yes. I reckon Australia, I've parked my car in many countries in the world, but I reckon Australia takes the biscuit as far as car parking signs are concerned. All you want to do is park your car. No big deal. You want to park your car, leave it there for a period of time, and come back later and drive off. Oh, no. Because what you want to know is whether you are allowed to park there or not. But many a time, as you're driving down that road, you've only got a few seconds, haven't you? Because you've got a bloke behind you who's anxious to get on. You don't really want to upset him or her behind you. And you only see this sign for a flashing few seconds. And in that period of time, what you've got to do is you've got to work out whether that is within the permitted hours, whether the hours fall within school hours, whether schools are on vacation or not, which side of the road you are according to the day of the week, whether it's a loading zone, a 15-minute, 1 hour or 2 hour or no hours, if it's after 6 p.m. or before. You've got to work all that out in a split second to decide whether you're going to park your car there. Signs can be pretty confusing. But as I said, there is a huge difference between a sign and a symbol. And the footy scarves and the beanie are symbols because they say something really important. If it's a Richmond scarf, it says that the owner of that scarf is long-suffering. If it's a Carlton scarf, it says that this person is a dreamer and longing for the days of old to return. If it's a Collingwood scarf, it usually indicates that the person holding it has no teeth. If it's a doggy scarf, then it says God is on your side. Do you see the difference? A sign is an indicator of an instruction or a guide, but a symbol is something in which we play a part and have an emotional attachment to. It's saying something about us. Because if I stand there in a footy crowd with my Melbourne Storm scarf on, and there's somebody standing next to me with the similar scarf on, even though I've never met, even though I don't know him and know nothing about this person whatsoever, nevertheless, at that moment, we are united. We are one. We come together because at that moment we have that in common. So this sign here, underneath this pulpit here, points us to the uniting church. But it's also a powerful symbol. It says that we belong. And the first bit of this sign, which screams out at us, and which also stands also underneath here, is the cross. Obviously, this is probably the best-known symbol in the world. It competes a bit nowadays with the golden arches, I know, but certainly throughout history, it's the cross that has had the absolute lead in terms of being best known and understood. We wear it round our necks. Some people have it tattooed on their bodies. It stands in every Christian church in the city, in the country, and across the world. And on Good Friday, I will be leading this procession of city churches around the CBD. And we will be following a large wooden cross. And that walk, known, as I said, as the Way of the Cross, will include members from the Catholic Church, the Uniting Church, the Anglican Church, the Baptist Church, the Lutheran Church, the Church of Christ, the Welsh Calvinistic Methodist Church, the Pentecostal churches, the Presbyterian Church, and even the Coptic Church. Now, of course, all those churches don't believe the same thing. They don't practice their religion in the same way. Their worship is different, and their understanding of the Bible and creeds differ from church to church. Many of their hymns or their songs are different, as are some of their languages. The robes the clergy wear are different. And yet, they all follow that same sign. At that moment, just like me standing next to a footy fan wearing the same scarf as me, at that moment, when we travel around the city, all those different churches, we are following the cross. And at that moment, we are saying we have that in common and we belong. It's a sign, the cross, that we're all comfortable with because we know it so well. It's central to our uniting church symbol, but of course, when we think about it, this thing that we often beautify, sometimes we put precious stones in it, sometimes it's made out of silver or gold, but when we think about it, it's an instrument of torture and death. The original cross is really a piece of roughly sawn timber thrown together and chucked into a hole in a piece of poor ground somewhere. If Jesus would have been hanged, would we now be looking at a scaffold on our church furniture? Or if he'd been stoned, would we have a pile of stones there? For the first couple of 100 years of Christianity, the sign of Christians were not a cross at all. It was the sign of a fish. And that came from a number of reasons, predominantly because the disciples themselves came from a fishing background, but mainly because the Greek word for fish is ichthus. And each letter of that Greek word stands for the first letter of the term in Greek, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Jesus Christos Theos Ios Sota. It was effectively a secret sign. But the cross came into common use in about the 4th century under the Emperor Constantine. And as we today consider this symbol, this sign, we are reminded, of course, of the suffering and of the pain that it represents. And there are crosses that we all carry. Between us, we all know a bit about pain, suffering, stress, anxiety, illness, bereavement, loneliness, despair, fear, loss of hope. We carry our crosses, all of us, every day. And we help other people to carry theirs. We are all Josephs of Arimathea, helping other people reach out and support them as they have a difficult time in the struggle of carrying their cross. And we are reminded that as Jesus suffered and died for what he believed, this too has been a strong element throughout history. Throughout history, we can recall countless numbers of people who have died for their belief. People like Thomas Becket, Thomas More, Joan of Arc, William Tyndale. More recently, people like Max Kolbe and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who died in Nazi Germany because of their Christian faith. Or the suffragette Emily Davidson, who threw herself in front of the king's horse to fight for equality for women. In our own time, we can remember this. We can remember Martin Luther King Jr., Steve Biko, Anwar Sadat, who died for their faith. But let's just think of the last few weeks. It's happening all the time. Only last week, a young man by the name of Clement Merrick, a 19-year-old, was killed fighting for marriage equality in France, as was Jose and Maria de Silva, fighting for their campaign to save the Amazon rainforest. In January, Dr. Gary Ortega was shot dead in the Philippines, where he was fighting to protect indigenous communities. This is happening now. This is the last few weeks. We stand alongside those martyrs, for they are under the same cross as ourselves. Let's look at another aspect of this sign, this image, that of the dove. And the dove represents or is symbolic of the Spirit. And yes, the Spirit is the harbinger of peace, but you will notice a red bit on the dove, which is also igniter of fire. And so the church claims this power of the Spirit. And in so doing, it should be an organization that reflects that power in what it does. What it does. Because that's the only way it works. It's about what we do, not necessarily about what we say or even believe. And so this church, St. Michael's, has a fabulous history of healing and recovery. It is very representative of that dove. Its Mingery Centre offers healing, peace, and quiet reflection in the city. Its counselling support services reach out to hundreds of people every month. The worship service here every Sunday, with its music, its prayer, its thoughtful reflection, hopes that individually and corporately we are extending well-being, and that's enhanced throughout our week. This peace, the Spirit, is central, like the cross, to our faith and worship. We all come with baggage, don't we? We all have a past. Sometimes, because of the orthodox attitude of the churches throughout the land and world, we get bogged down in what churches call, and I quote, sin. And the consequence of that is guilt. I went to see a lady very, very recently who was at her wit's end because she believed, and she'd had a lot of trouble in her life, she believed that everything that went wrong in her life was punishment because of a relatively minor misdemeanor in her youth, decades and decades previous. And for the whole of her life, it had weighed her down. How very sad. What a fantastic opportunity we have to relieve people of those lifetime anxieties. This is the church's dove role, bringing peace and healing. And we continue to commit ourselves to that. And we will be looking at new ways that we can reach out into the hearts and lives of people from and within this church. But what then is the other aspect of the Spirit? The fire. Well, do we see a church around us, this uniting church, or any of the other churches that we'll be walking alongside on the way of the cross on Good Friday? Do we see a church fired up for action? Do we see a dynamic organization inspired to smash down walls of inequality, breaking through orthodoxy and seeking new ways to be a church in an ever-changing world? Do we see a risk-taking agenda, changing lives, performing its own miracles, breaking the mold, being challenged by the words in Revelation, "Behold, I make all things new"? Or do we see a church bogged down by rules and regulations and processes, chained by its own comfortable environment, not wanting, in Paul Tillich's phrase, to shake those foundations? Where are our modern-day prophets, like the prophets of old, not saying cozy statements of happiness, but screaming at us, again, as Tillich says, to return to the chaos? Let's see some of that. Where are the risk takers in our church who might upset people with their scary but challenging words? Where is the church breaking the mold, doing the unexpected? Where is it on fire? Doing the unexpected. I've got a daughter who does the unexpected all the time. She's an adult now, but she's still doing it. But when she was a young girl, I remember picking her up from the bus, the school bus. And some of you have been there, you know. She gets off the bus. You've been there. And then you say, "What have you done today at school?" And then you are told the regular response, which reminds you that in every school and every classroom in this nation, every teacher is teaching the most significant and important subject to every child in the country. Because when you say, "What have you been doing today?" their main subject is nothing much. I remember it. Nothing much. Anyway, I tried to drag out of her why she was like this. And this was coming up to Christmas. And they were having a nativity play at school. And do you know, my daughter says, Rebecca got the part of Mary. And she didn't think much of Rebecca. No. And I said, "Well, what have you got?" And she said, "I'm person number 6. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Nothing. We just stand there and look at the baby Jesus." And I said to her, "Fantastic. That's the best part you can have." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I bet you Rebecca's got lines she's got to learn and spiel out on the night." "Oh, yeah, she has, yeah." I said, "And person number 6 hasn't got any lines to learn, has she?" "No." I said, "That means you can say whatever you like." "Really?" she said. "Yeah, of course you can. You're there looking at the baby Jesus." Well, I forgot about it, didn't I? I forgot about it until the night of the nativity play. So off we trotted, Mum and Dad and my son, and we were sitting there watching my little 7 or 8-year-old sitting there as person number 8 or whatever the number was at the back there looking at the baby Jesus, and Rebecca was going through her words. And then all of a sudden, person number 8 bursts out. "Who would believe that me, a humble person number 8, could be here to witness the birth of the Son of God. And off she went. It was a wonderful monologue, and I'll never forget the teacher looking at the script. She's done that all her life, my daughter. She's still doing it. Let me tell you. She is always doing the unexpected. Let's see that, shall we? In the life of our church, we desperately want to see that. This is risk-taking and breaking the mold. This fire in our uniting church sign is where we belong. Let's fan those flames a bit. Do the unexpected. So, if we look at this sign, we see the cross and we see the dove. What else do we see? The last image to consider in this sign or this symbol is the U. Actually, it's not a U. What it is, it's a half circle. It's a broken circle, deliberately. And what it is there for is to remind us of the disunity of the church. And it's a commitment from the uniting church which says we are continually in the process of uniting. That's why we are uniting and not united. When it was originally designed, that sign, it reflected the church's commitment to seek church unity. And that still stands. The way of the cross on Good Friday is a step towards that. We must forever be committed to fight against disunity in the church. But what I would want to do is to take that a step further than simply the church is coming together. We must continually work towards cooperation and partnership. And here in St. Michael's, let's look at ways in which we can partner with the corporate world, with the not-for-profit sector, even government, to see what we can do together. For the same unity that we want for the church, we must also want for our own communities. We must stand against racial discrimination and disharmony. We must stand firmly against those shocking phrases like Pauline Hanson came out with this week when she said she was praying for a Muslim ban. It's a shocking statement about prayer as well as unity. We don't pray for a Muslim ban. This church prays for unity and harmony with all, irrespective of race, creed, sexuality, status, or age. This church, with the uniting church, holds basic Christian values of the importance of every human being and concern for the welfare of the whole human race. And whilst at St. Michael's we can't perhaps change the world, we can start where we are towards breaking down barriers in our street, in our city, and perhaps even in our church. And so, today we are reminded of this sign. We stand under the cross. We look for the power of the Spirit, and we commit ourselves passionately to unity and reconciliation.